for a fine. And we came on the program 3 days later, Kabu, and I promised your audience in Jamaica that I will take on the unconstitutionality of the Obeah Act in Jamaica, that it was an affront and an abridgment of the right to religious practices. The consequence of that promise to you and came out of the discussion you and I had. So I'm instructed by Kabu and the ancestors. We filed an action on Friday of this week. Friday is what date, Kabu?
Today is the 18th. Saturday would be the 17th. Friday then would be the 16th.
Friday the 16th of May, we filed an action in the Supreme Court to challenge the Obeah Act as being unconstitutional and in breach of 12 breaches of our Constitution, the right of persons to practice their religious and their spiritual beliefs without hindrance and without being treated as criminals and sent to prison.
And
so that's the breaking news.
This is a really big thing. This is really big. You heard it here first. Breaking news, an action filed in the Supreme Court. I want you to break that down for all of our listeners so that they can understand what that means. When we say an action has been filed in the Supreme Court, and you also talk about challenging the constitutionality of it. Break that down for all of our listeners, Bert.
Okay, so this is what happened. The last time the assembly in Jamaica, 1889, that would have been about 45, 60 years after our freedom, 1889, that act made it an offense to practice Obeah in Jamaica. And the penalty was that you would go to prison and you would be whipped. So the Obeah man was whipped as a part of punishment. And when we looked at the history of that law, we realized that our colonizers hated the fact that we brought our spirituality here, and they wanted to stop it and Christianize us into their religion. And they figured the best way to do it was not to preach to us, was not to have a church and have us converted, was that to make it criminal for us to continue with our spirituality. And what they did, Kabu, was to make Obeah seem to be so evil, that the person, Professor Hutton, who is the applicant in this matter, he opined as an historian that they treated Obeah as if it was worse than slavery. Let me repeat that. They made us believe, and some people in your audience today, think that Obeah is worse than slavery. So we have to have a change in the mindset. So we went to the court, and I looked at the Charter of Rights, which is a 2011 charter, and we picked up 12 breaches of the Constitution in this act, this old act.
Can you take us through them, or do you want to just identify some? Because we'd like to know the main concept. I've looked at it too, and brilliant work. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing, Bert Samuels. What are the main constitutional grounds? And you mentioned Professor Hutton, of course, as a person who, and we want to come back to that, who brought this case, if you will. So the main constitutional grounds on which Professor Hutton's case is being brought, what are they?
Fine. So firstly, the Jamaican Constitution at Section 17 says everyone has a right to practice their religious beliefs. So the fact that, and Professor Hudson has made out Obeah to be a religion brought from Africa. So for all these years, for over a century and a half, the law has been on the books that to practice Obeah is a criminal offense. It is the only religion that has been made a criminal offense in Jamaica. So that by itself is one of the breaches of the Constitution. That is the right of everyone to practice their religious beliefs. 1. 2, we said that there's no equality in the law because Indians come on television on Sundays and other days of worship for Christians, and they propagate their palm reading, their fortune telling, and they put it on television and publish it. And the Obeah man has to be hiding between rocks and crevices to practice his fortune telling. Mm-hmm. So we say that there is a clause in the Constitution that says we should have equality before the law. 2, 3. The other one is that if you go to the Obeah man, if you consult with him, you yourself, his membership, his clientele, is guilty of a criminal offense. And therefore, there is a clause in the Constitution that gives you freedom of association, that we should be able to associate with IRF, and we should be able to associate with our church, associate with trade unions. We should not be prevented from gathering and associating. So that's a breach of our freedom of association. And then in the Obeah Act, unlike any other law in Jamaica, when you're through doing your sentence, they say that you must now come under supervision, police supervision. And we say, no, you already served your sentence, and therefore the presumption of innocence is abrogated by that particular clause. It's the only law in Jamaica that says when you've done your sentence, not even a rapist right now is under police supervision after he's through with his sentence. And that is a horrible consequence. Then they speak about the instruments of Obeah. And we looked at other religions, and you saw Clinton, Professor Clinton saying, listen, the Catholics have their cups. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has its vessels that it swings with smokes emitting from it. And the chalice is part of Catholic worship, is the cup from which the blood of Jesus is in it, and it is drunk as a sacrament. Those instruments are not criminal for other religions, but for Obeah, any instrument they see, and we don't know what they call instruments of Obeah, because white people and English people don't know our spirituality. How they know what we use? So that's another ground that way. So those are the main grounds of the 12.
So this is precedent setting.
Oh yes. And I think the entire Caribbean, because the Obeah law is right through. In Antigua in 1904, they brought some Obeah men into the capital and publicly flogged them in Antigua. So this anti-Obeah law is through the entire former British English-speaking Caribbean.
Bert, we know, and let's put this out there, that there are many critics who are against repealing the act, and they argue that this could open the door for fraud and exploitation. What's your concern with that, and how do you respond to that concern within, if you did, within the legal filing?
All right, so there it is. In the Obeah Act, they start out by saying that the Obeah man is a fraudist, that he collects your money and he creates a fraud. But almost every religious sector, the religious groups who pay tithe, who take up offering, who promise healing, other groups do it. But that's not seen as fraud. So the laws, the criminal laws, the laws against property, the Larceny Act takes care of fraudists. We're not encouraging fraudists by making this action, but there's a law that specially deals with that. Why are you saying that when the Obeah man is collecting money, telling you what he's doing, the Indians who advertise on Sundays, you have to pay them? That's not treated as fraud. So you understand, it's a discrimination against, it's a self-hate. It's a self-hate thing where even members of our population. Now, I'm come from a Christian background, but I think that Rastafari must enjoy their religious belief. Muslims must be able to practice their religious belief as much as I can practice mine. So if I am honest and truthful to the respect of the religions of others, I cannot bear and stand by and see you criminalizing one sector of spirituality and leaving the others untouched. You cannot do that.
We want to talk to you about the process of filing, what all of that entails, just so our listeners have as much information as possible. Let me just remind our listeners that this hour, 7 to 8 o'clock, that it's there, but thank heavens, it's not being used. But we, Jamaica woke up a few weeks ago, and you came on to talk about it, about a ruling in a court in Jamaica where a judge can say sentence, even though, because the person was sentenced to pay the fee or spend time in prison. Somebody who was brought before the court for practicing Obeah. This, of course, as you said, got Jamaica talking. The Gleaner, as you pointed out, literally wrote an editorial. And when you see an editorial in a newspaper, it means this is the view of the ownership of the newspaper. So the Gleaner apologized on behalf of who?
Never seen that before.
The Gleaner apologized to the young man. This is brilliant. Then we saw a letter from Louis Moyston to the Gleaner on the very same thing. We also saw there was another a long article, a commentary, if you will, from Lloyd Barnett on the very same. In the same
who is a constitutional expert, a constitutional expert. And I tell you, kudos to Lloyd Barnett. He refuses to take King's counsel like myself. We do not bow to the King. And remember, every time I come on your program, I say, I am PC. I am the People's Counsel. Yes. I'm not the King's Counsel. Yes. It is the King of England and his ancestors who made the Obeah Act. So how could I be one of his lawyers? Come on.
So in terms of a legal challenge, Bert, you're saying, and this is a filing, that the law directly violates the rights enshrined in Jamaica's Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, religious and human rights. And I want to talk a little bit, let me take a break, but when I come back, I want to talk about the broader social impact and this that is now being filed in this legal and political climate. That groundbreaking news here on the island in Jamaica. You're hearing it for the very first time in this program this morning, that there has been a constitutional challenge, if you will. At the heart of this challenge, the controversial Obeah Act, which is a colonial era law that has long criminalized African-derived spiritual practices. And we had that in action just a few weeks ago on the island when a young man was charged, was given the sentence of paying or serving time in prison. And we have now on the island, Professor Clinton Hutton has taken legal action against the government of Jamaica, we can say that, asserting that the Obeah Act violates the constitutional rights of Jamaicans to freedom of religion, expression, and cultural identity. He's represented by none other than a Pan-African attorney at Law Bert Samuels. He's a leading voice in Caribbean jurisprudence. He's a stalwart defender of Pan-African rights and justice. And he's helping us to understand what this means, this challenge to the Constitution. But we can't underscore this enough, that here we have it, while we're talking about the Constitution, because there's another ruling in another case regarding SOEs and so on, that the court has ruled on.
Another day.
So the
I wanted to make a point.
Yes.
2 points.
Yes.
First one is, did you tell me Haiti Day today?
Today is today is Flag Day in Haiti.
Okay, so why don't you make the link?
Why don't I make
the link? Make the link, Kabu.
I should have made a link a long time ago, because this and this is when we talk about the wider Caribbean.
Yes, you did say that. Yes.
Because and you mentioned Antigua and so on, but Haiti, for example, we saw just before the revolution in 1804 that when Haitians got together, Boukman Duty and Cecile Fatiman and them, one of the things that they did was to go through these spiritual rituals, which they call voodoo in Haiti, but we have to understand voodoo within the context of the wider religious, in the same way that we understand Obeah. So,
of course.
So we made that link on Haiti Day, on Flag Day in Haiti.
Of course, it is our day. The ancestors are awake, and that's why today the breaking news comes on their day, because they have been demonized. Yes. They want the Haitians to think that Haiti is poor because of voodoo. It's poor because the French have milked it and drained it, and the French parasites have stormed the economy of Haiti and trying to blame their poverty on voodoo. It is enslavement and colonialism. French colonialism is responsible for the poverty of Haiti, not voodoo. I mean, Clinton Hutton made the point to me in a discussion just before I filed the matter, that, Bert, if we didn't have that spirituality here, slavery would have mad all away.
And that
we
is,
had to have that resort.
and that is a point, that's a really great point to be made in terms of going into your spirituality, understanding ourselves as spiritual beings, and going into that space for rituals. And praying is a ritual, and how you pray is a ritual. These are some of the things that post-traumatic slavery disorder causes us not to remember.
Indeed.
But
I don't want you to leave it out saying, Kabu, you are responsible for this action being taken. Annals of history will show that 2-3 Sundays ago, Kabu and I had a discussion, and that led to this action being taken. Don't take yourself out of the picture,
I refuse
Kabu.
to. Thank you so much, Bert. I will not. I respect that. Thank you so much.
Big up to Kabu, and
I
Kabu,
appreciate
you need to let them know that every other day we were speaking and moving together, preparing this matter together. You're part of the preparation of it. I just couldn't let it go. I couldn't let it go, Kabu.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Bert. The given your own Pan-African activism and your legal activism, do you see similar legal battles taking shape in other parts of the Caribbean or the wider diaspora?
No, I remember when we took the action that Rastafarians who are brought to prison should not be trimmed. After that action was taken by me and we won, and they stopped trimming Rastafari as of the 2002, a number of Caribbean lawyers contacted me to get the papers from me, get the arguments from me, so they could lay before their parliament and in court. And remember, we want to be the bookman of Jamaica. The bookman himself influenced that revolution, and the spirits that are down here, and makes it possible that Jamaica takes the lead in some of these things. The ancestors' voices seem to be very loud in this part of the Caribbean. So yes, the question is, do other Caribbean islands, I expect them to come on board, because a lot of politicians are afraid to do what we are doing, Kabu. They feel that the population, the section of the population that thinks Obeah is so evil, that they would hurt that demographic. But we think that justice is for all. That's what we think, and we don't care. So we're not seeking votes; we are seeking justice.
And this is a legal challenge. This is cold. This is a cold case. No, well, not a cold case in terms of law, but this is an objective case that is being brought. What are the next legal steps in this case, and how can the public support the effort?
All right, fine. Here we go. So the matter was filed on Friday. We are serving the Attorney General on Monday, tomorrow, with the papers. Now, the Attorney General, when he looks at it, he has an option. He can say, listen, we're not going to resist this. We are going to consent to the fact that the Obeah laws are unconstitutional. And it is my humble opinion that based on the papers filed and the history provided by Professor Clinton Hutton, kudos to you, Clinton, you came forward. Yes. When they read our papers, I'm confident they will say, no, this is irrefutable. This is, the Gleaner says, this is nonsense. The Gleaner newspaper says it's nonsense, not just Kabu and I. So we think that the Attorney General may, and I hope he will, not fight this one, but will say, no, I agree, it ought to be off the books.
Against that background, do you anticipate resistance, and if so, from where?
Yeah, I think there may be some misinformed church leaders who may think that we are promoting fraud and things, but it's a public education history. Because white supremacy is practiced by people among us. But I think that when you look at Clinton's affidavit, and the public will make it public, when he goes through the history of our enslavement, the history of spirituality, and what it does for us, and what he said, because one of the things he says, I'm a researcher. So if I go to talk to Obeah man and I'm in the midst of looking at his instruments as a researcher, a professor of history, I have committed a criminal offense. So it doesn't even allow research into our own culture, because the researchers have to handle these instruments. So, you know, I think that it's a public education thing that is necessary.
What does this mean for other, because I know that the discussion on constitutional reform and the road to republic, that's a discussion that is ongoing. This is a process that is underway. But what does this mean for other colonial laws that are on the books that we don't necessarily see coming up in these conversations around the constitutional reform process, such as the Beach Management Act?
Yes, the Beach Management Act, which makes the waters on which we travel to come here as kidnapped people, that we are now kidnapped away from these beaches. That's a colonial law that is here. The practices too, the calling, opening the courts with saying, God save the king, those are things that we must wipe out of our minds, and our Constitution must deal with that. That there cannot be any reference to any person outside of the island of Jamaica, and any reverence or respect shown to them over and above the people. I've been asking, I wrote to the Chief Justice of Jamaica asking that we do not open the courts with God save the king, but rather with God save the people, or with all right. You don't have to have that kind of designation. In other words, the minds of Jamaican people in the courts is that you can't get justice unless you open the court in the king's name, the oppressor's name. So those are some of the colonial practices that we have to wipe from our Constitution.